Today is, what is today? I'm looking at the agenda. It's Monday, November 14th, 10:30 a.m. Meeting of the Acushnet Board of Selectmen. Is there a motion to call the meeting to order?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Please rise to the
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, gentlemen, we've got a number of executive sessions on the agenda. We're going to hold those off till the end of the meeting. We'll just go through the appointments and old business. We're going to resume tax classification hearing, which was posted on 10/25/22 for the purpose of determining whether or not Acushnet shall remain with a classified tax rate as in past years. The hearing was continued with date certain to 11/14 at 10:30 a.m. So I guess we need a motion to reopen that tax classification hearing.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. As you may recall, Ms. Koska and the Board of Assessors were here for the original meeting on the 25th, and at that time, I believe the assessors put on the table that they had voted and approved moving the tax shift to 50% or 150% shift. Kelly, I don't know if you need to,
Yes,
Just to go over some updated information, at that time on October 25th, I had the levy that I had done the computations on set at higher only because of new growth had not been certified. But the levy originally from the 25th was, the calculations were against a levy of $21,565,929, but that had to be decreased. And the levy now that we are looking at with certified growth is $21,407,585. And you should have all that information in front of you. I know there are a few versions, and I just want to make sure that I'm speaking to you when you have that right info with you.
okay?
Okay. The Board of Assessors still stands where their recommendation of the 50% shift due to the increase in class values. The residential class did get impacted this fiscal year with the highest rate, which is about between 13 and 15% overall in the category, where the other commercial and industrial only went up about 2 or 3%. Personal property went about another 7 or 8. With that being said, there is the worksheet that breaks down, it's an Excel worksheet that breaks down the different tax shifts based on the $21.4 million levy. Using those tax rates, I've also provided printed scenarios of what the tax dollars would look like to the taxpayers of Acushnet using that $21.4 million levy, and it's pretty self-explanatory. So just to surmise it, you're basically looking at an increase of taxation if we were at a status quo of the 25% tax shift between 22 and 23. We're looking at, let's see, get to the right page. The residential taxpayer could look at an increase of about $247.06. Where the commercial industrial taxpayer, looking at average values, computing the taxes, would have a savings of about $117.80, leaving it the same as in previous years. With a recommendation of the Board of Assessors, the second page, which shows the 50% tax shift, the residential taxpayer would look comparably at a difference in annual taxes of about $81.58, and an increase for the commercial industrial classes of taxes with a 50% tax shift of about $1,100. So that's quite substantial and for those classes, but again, the rationale, just to repeat with what Chairman Brown said in regards to commercial industrial entities, they do have other revenue sources, and there were a lot of post-COVID monies available to them, both federally and through the state. They're looking at other revenue sources to actually pay for the expenditure bills such as taxation. So there are other pages of different scenarios with different shifts as you go through. They're basically self-explanatory, using the same values in comparison and then getting the final tax dollar.
All right, great, thank you. Gentlemen, I think, I think we've done in the past. If we make a motion, ask for a motion to consider the assessor's recommendation, and that will open the floor up to debate, and if there is a dissent from that, then I'd ask that we offer up a friendly amendment to that motion, and then set where we feel it needs to go, rather than it just becoming, we voted down that, or what works, you know what I'm saying? Like, if there's something different, then just offer it up as a friendly amendment to the.
Again, the assessors is solely a
Yeah.
recommendation. The Board of
100%.
Selectmen statutory have
Yep,
the
yep.
power to make the actual vote.
So I guess the question before the board would be, is there a motion to accept the assessor's recommendation of 150% split? If there's a motion.
Just to accept the recommendation.
Yeah,
correct?
there's no vote will be taken, just to open up debate and discussion on that, so, right, from a Robert's Rule standpoint, it would open up discussion unless, so we've got to address the assessor's recommendation, right? So by a motion and a second,
So maybe a motion to address versus a motion to accept, if there's any discussion at least.
well, I mean, the affirmative action would be to accept their recommendation. That's the question before us, and then if the board, members of the board feel differently, then you would amend that motion to reflect what the board decides. Or we can just do, if there's the votes aren't there to accept the assessor's recommendation, up and down vote, and then move on to something else. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible.
It seems like it got complicated.
It's not, I just want to make sure.
Because I don't want to accept
Well, no,
the assessor's recommendation.
Kevin, all the motion does is gives us the ability to have a discussion about that. And if the votes, it's not a vote, it's just a motion, it opens up the floor to, for debate and conversation. Mr. Dakin, as our resident parliamentarian from the town meeting, the motion on the floor allows for debate to take place, correct?
Correct. You can, my understanding is you're going to accept their recommendation. You're not going to vote to accept it. And once you accept it, then anyone can approach or make a motion to amend it accordingly.
Ms. Kelly?
Why don't you vote, move to accept the report of the Board of Assessors for consideration?
There you go.
Okay, then that's fine too.
So moved.
Second.
All right, so now it's up for discussion. Now the floor is open to
Would you
discuss
like
the
me to stay at
report.
the podium? Or
Yeah, if these gentlemen have questions.
Certainly.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So I was afforded the opportunity by the board to explore as much information as we could before we jump the gun and go to the max 150, which it is our max, right? 150?
I think it's, if you go beyond that, it becomes a totally different route. You have to go and go to town meeting vote.
Through a bunch of exploratory conversations with the town accountant, Mr. Kelly, Ms. Koska, through Ms. Koska's exercise, for the sake of that, there was a reduction in new growth by $161,344 due to the appellate court holding up, the DOR holding
Nope.
up.
That difference in value was basically the methodology that I used in regards to the personal property, it's the utility accounts. there, instead of net book value, you're supposed to use actual inventory value, then there's a blended value, and my DOR rep and I weren't seeing eye to eye, so that kind of left that pocket of money in the growth column that was not certified by the DOR standards.
Correct, so basically the DOR reduced new growth by $161,344.
Yes, still making the 329, which 325 was aligned for
The
budgetary
original,
purposes.
the original number, I guess, was like 490 something, right?
Yes,
So
sir.
basically what that did was it took the shift and moved all categories up by 5%. If you look at the charts compared to what's now and what was done before, it shifts everything down. So if you went to 150, that automatically could become, theoretically, by the reduction by the DOR, 145. There's other ways to reduce, and I know there's been some discussion about values going up, and that's what's impacting taxation. I tend to believe that that's not true. It's all about the spending, right? If you have values that come way up, then tax rates should come down to compensate. If you spend the same amount of money from the previous year and you had this happen, this scenario happen, your tax rate would drop, right?
It's
That's the way it
opposite
works.
relationship to value and rate, but if you have the same bottom line, yes, absolutely, the tax rate
Okay,
would
so
go.
it's more about spending than it is values. So with that said, I did say that the max I would be looking at then was 140, okay? Because I think it's extremely dangerous if the Board of Selectmen, and anyone in town actually, goes to the extreme of 150. Because once you hit that extreme of 150, we know spending's not coming down. So I would ask the question is, how do you ever come back to help the residential tax base if spending's gonna continue to increase, but you're already at the max and you've run out of capacity to shift that burden?
Can I answer that question?
Yes.
The perfect scenario would be other revenue sources other than taxation. We used to be basically a 50-50 community where 50 were other revenue sources and 50% was taxation. If you look at the recap page for the 2023, other revenue and estimated receipts are 18.3 million, where taxation and the levy is at 21.3 million. Or 21.4 million. So that's not as 50-50 as it was anymore. So unfortunately, more of the burden is being put on the tax side. We have other revenue sources. I'm not sure what they are financially. Maybe Jamie could answer more to that on state aid and things of that nature. So that's number one. Number two, I think the way it's set up almost is you can never have less spending. As you well know, you've been doing this a while. It's always, the state even gives you the 2.5% on top of your levy from prior years, so you never spend less. So unless you can think of a way of spending less, I know I certainly can't get creative and spend.
Totally understand that, but there was a perception on TV, and I've heard from different residents, is that can't be true, and it's not true. It's not just about values skyrocketing. It's about the spending.
It's
And
the
that's
bottom
what
line,
That's correct.
$21.4
As the levy
million
goes up,
budget.
and that impacts that scenario. So there's a couple of things that we, the Board of Selectmen, can do. In discussions with the town accountant and Ms. Costco, we've had some different scenarios. We've run different numbers within the ledger to say what would happen to the tax rate. There's excessive overlay capacity right now of the amount of roughly $1.7 million. Our 5-year average run rate on overlay abatements and things of the like is roughly $90,000, and there is about $500,000 outstanding at the Tax Appellate Board. So with that said, if we wanted to really do the best for both classes, residential and business, we could put in $120,000 from the overlay into excess levy capacity, and again, you would adjust this tax bracket down by 5% again. So there is a way to do it to lower the levy, and that's how you would do it to adjust for taxation. So if the concern is everybody's gonna get rocked with a high tax bill, which I've done a bunch of different analysis, and I don't see how that's being extrapolated, that's gonna come about. I understand the figures that are here, but when I do figures, and I did the 12% up and down, I look at that run rate, it's not out of whack that dramatically, so I don't understand going 125 to 150, even 125 now to 140. Basically, what the DOR has done is taken that 140 and puts me at 135. And what I'm saying to the board is if you want to take that and stick from the 135 and go with 135, you can actually lower the tax rate by taking that $120,000 from overlay and putting it in excess levy capacity. So it's another 5%. That's what I'm saying.
That's one point of view. Mr. Hinckley?
Defer to the expert mathematician over here. And I'd also believe that Mr. Dakin had some good points to bring up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Kevin, I guess I want to understand your rationale, but I kind of look at it as, with this exercise, who are we shifting the burden to, right? And the vote that the assessors took was to shift the burden more along the commercial industrial and lessen the burden of the residential. And so I look at it really from that lens. The numbers to me, you know, you get a $247 number and an $81 number. I'm on the side of the $81 number and how we get there. And I've always been a believer in, the residents in town having less of a burden. And so I would be supportive of, as I said last time, 150% shift, just like the assessors recommended. That said, Mr. Dakin, although, happy to open it up to you, you took the time to come here. It's always good to hear from our taxpayers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'd just like to offer some vital facts favoring the increase in the shift. Your ultimate call is what percentage for your consideration. And I'd like to go through some deductions that business people have, commercial and industrial, that our residential homeowners don't. For instance, all these items are deductible from the federal income tax for business people. Landscaping, sewer and water bills, snow removal, trash pickup, the cost of electricity and heat, which is going up exponentially for our residential people, insurances, homeowners, medical insurance, property maintenance, if business needs a new roof or a new driveway or painting, that's deductible from the federal income tax. Probably the biggest one is depreciation, where they can show a loss on paper on their tax return and still have a positive cash flow. So I feel not going with an increase. You gentlemen decide how much, but I really believe there should be a shift. It would place an undue burden on all our residential taxpayers, which the last time I looked was 90% of our tax base. So I strongly recommend an increase in the shift of at least 140%.
To the commercial side.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, so just so everybody's aware and the folks and the taxpayers at home are aware, when I sat down with the town accountant, Mr. Kelly, Ms. Koska, I tried to utilize the best methodology to lower both classes, the burden on both classes. And that's exactly what I've done. There is a way to do it, and I believe that the town accountant's office and Mr. Kelly and the new treasurer collector all agreed with my philosophy of what I just outlined and displayed, of saying take 120,000 from the overlay, put it in excess levy capacity, helps reduction on both classes, business and residential. There's no harm in doing it. It doesn't impact any of the spending that we are going to have this budget season. Is that correct, Mr. Kelly?
Correct.
So that being said, it's not just something that magically happened in my mind. There's a simple philosophy to what I do, and that's to lessen the burden on both classes. And again, I can't say this enough. I will never go to the maximum capacity as recommended, for the simple fact is once you do that, there's no turning back. You have no room in the future to do the same exercise in the future to alleviate some of that burden from residential. So essentially what you're gonna do, by saying what I'm doing this year, you're gonna hurt residents in the future years to come, because you're at your max, and that's extremely dangerous, and I will never, in a million years, do that unless it's an absolute necessity, and this is not an absolute necessity. What we're trying to do is, and I get all the things, Mr. Dakin and I did it back in 2011-12, where we shifted from the assessor's recommendation of 115 to 125. I think we did it in 2 subsequent years, okay, to lessen the burden on the residential taxpayers. And here we are again, we're gonna do it again. I would assume we're gonna do some adjustment. What I don't wanna do is, I don't wanna hurt, and I never wanna hurt, and I'm always looking out after the taxpayers, but I also don't wanna crush the business class that we have, because we do only have a small percentage of business class. And those people have been wiped out in the closures of COVID, as Mr. Dakin has mentioned. I know they got some COVID money, and they have had higher labor costs, they have higher input costs due to inflation. We're all facing the same thing, energy costs and the things of the like. Doesn't matter whether you're a business person or you're a resident. It really doesn't matter. It's tit for tat, okay? And if you happen to be a resident that owns a business in town and you are a resident of town, it's basically coming out to be a wash. So it doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't make any sense to have that happen. And again, I went through all of this work to look at state aid, roughly only increasing $75,000, $80,000, is that correct, Mr. Kelly, per year? It's basically 2.5% every year. I mean, there's a money problem, and I think that we've reached that capacity. So I think there's a real conversation to be had now, and it's gonna be coming up very soon, is budget process, right? Is how we spend our revenues that we have available for budgetary reasons. It's that simple. We can't go crazy. Everybody can't get $500,000 a year and say everything's hunky-dory. There was a bad practice several years back where you were using free cash, and that's a no-no. You're not supposed to be using free cash to balance budgets. That's how taxes get exploded. The more spending, the higher your taxes go. It's that simple. The formula is really that simple. And there's nobody, I don't think, that can debate that formula, because it's all about the spending. Mr. Kelly actually has a bumper sticker inside of his office that says, "It's the spending, stupid." That's basically what it comes down to. It's all about the spending, and we need to be careful of what we're doing, where we're spending money. And again, I say it again and again and again, I firmly believe that the assessors also said they were okay with the 140 shift. They were okay with that. With the exercise that the DOR took with Ms. Koska, that lowered it another 5%, so that puts you at 135. If you jump to the 135 split, just to make a case for 135 split, on basically a $395,000 home, your taxes are gonna go up $180, okay, for a real estate. That's norm compared to past practices and past years. There's nothing out of the ordinary about that, so let's not all jump up and down and say, oh my God, real estate taxes are out of the norm. It's not. It's absolutely not true. It's pretty much in line. If anything, it's probably a little bit less, based on all the calculations I've done. And if you look at the increase on the 135 shift at 180 to a residential taxpayer, and then you look at the shift on the same 135 to a business owner, it's 360. It's exactly 100%, okay? If you look at what commercial real estate values grew, which was 6%, and you look at residential at 12.5%, that's basically 100%. So they kind of wash each other out. 100%, 100%. So I don't know any other philosophy to take, and all the due diligence I've done in researching tax rate and what's best and what's not best. You can't put small businesses out of business because we're already at a small percentage of commercial people. And I understand we have some big commercial properties in the town of Acushnet. I get it. But it's still not right for the little mom and pops and all those other people to get whacked with a higher tax rate and possibly put them people out of business. So I'm never in a million years would ever go to the max 150 or even there about close, because you're screwed once you get to that number, because there's no coming back. There is absolutely no coming back from that number, in my opinion. And if somebody can tell me how I would ever be able to come back from that massive move, please stand up and tell me how that would happen, because I don't see it happen. As spending goes up, you have no more room to go on the shift, and spending goes up, you're zonking the residents every year thereafter, and there's nowhere for you to go. So I I would make a motion to take $120,000 of overlay. Overlay is at $1.7 million. Again, what are we doing? We building slush funds everywhere? I mean, that's part of overtaxation right there. So for this board not to even consider taking $120,000 and put in excess levy capacity to reduce again by 5%, because that's what that'll come out to, that 120 grand will come out to, is beyond me. You help out both classes.
Well, I mean, Mr. Gasper, I'm glad you raised the issue of the 120,000 overlay. I mean, I would take that money, do what you said, and do the shift at 150 and really double down and help out the residents. I mean, we're potentially in an unprecedented recession. People are hurting out there, and if there's an opportunity to capture a moment in time to provide help now, I mean, you got some people who, quite frankly, may not be here next year, you know, and so if there's an opportunity to help them now, I would do that. But go ahead, Kelly.
Just to speak of Kevin and with overlay, statutorily, the Board of Assessors is who signs off on the overlay page on the recap. So I cannot make a determination without their collective vote. That's number one, to change the number to what you would like it to be, which is the 120, to leave in excess overlay capacity, or overlay for this year. That would change maybe the tax rate from what you have here by about a penny, anyway, just looking at it from that point of view. Number two, yes, we do have $1.5 million in excess levy, an overlay. But like you said, we have the $500,000 in the utilities. We have uncollected taxes also from past years that will help. But in some years, the selectmen and the finance committee have come to the assessors looking to button up the budget with excess overlay capacity release. So that scenario would be off the table. So if we came down and monies needed to close that gap, and if they were looking at overlay, that couldn't be hit again, I think, to be logically and prudent with whatever money's left in that coffer. That would be my thought. I cannot answer for the Board of Assessors and what you're saying for on the amount, Kevin, on that page, because they sign off on it. Thirdly, on the excess levy capacity page, the DOR now has I've been looking back in past years, as of 20, the selectmen or the collective board of city council or mayor does not sign off on that page. If we are going to have an excess levy capacity of a six-figure, I'm going to request that one of the selectmen sign off on that page as well for the future, just to ensure that there's record of historically what the pattern's been, because who's to know what's impacted it? We've left, over the past 2 fiscal years, over $500,000 behind. So I don't know how to tell you how it actually is impacted moving forward. I don't know. I really don't know.
What was left was $391,000 when Julie was here, and that was in the year that we had $734,000 in new growth, and that's extremely dangerous to let the town budget with that new growth number of $734,000 because it's been unforeseen in the town's history. And we usually normally budget $250 to $300, max $300. So
Absolutely.
we shelved $391,000 before the previous town administrator left. She took off about $282,000 of excess levy capacity, leaving the remainder 110 that was sitting here. And then Mr. Kelly took that last 110 off. So now we're back to tax to the max, right? And that was prudent on the behalf of the board to do that back then and shelf half that new growth, because that would be extremely dangerous to allow that to go into budgetary when you don't have that reoccurring every year, right? So it's all about what you actually have reoccurring every year. And that's why that was done. But that person, the previous town administrator, decided to take that off, okay, without the Board of Selectmen knowing it was coming off in that big bulk, $282,000 roughly, just call it 280, okay, and then proceeded to use 300 and some free cash.
In the year previous, when she put 391 and change in, she used 343 of free cash.
So it just becomes this becomes transparency of government, right? Is who's
Yes.
telling who what and who's really being truthful. And that's my problem after I did this long study of where the money went and what's going on. Is it's this happened because they were bailing out and they wanted to take the money off the table and stick it in there, and then the next thing you know, guess who's paying for that? We, the taxpayers, right? So all I'm trying to do is level out the playing field a little bit. 120 grand's not hurting anybody from overlay surplus to shelf it if we're really out to save the residents, the taxpayers of Acushnet. And again, the impact on the tax bill is not outside the norm. So, I mean,
But my point is just, Kevin, I cannot answer for the Board of Assessors. The sign off on that page is them for that number that is reported to
I
the
understand, but the
state.
Board of Selectmen can vote to release in the amount of $120,000 from overlay surplus, can't they?
No,
Why
that
not?
is totally governed by the Board of Assessors.
Well, it's the opinion of the town accountant and the treasurer collector and
And I'm not
Mr.
saying that they're not
Kelly,
gonna
that
go
we-
with it, I just can't answer for them at
This
this
is a
time.
way, it's only a way, I'm not saying it's etched in stone, it's a way for this board to reduce it. It's more than a penny, because if your 161 equaled 11 cents, there's no way that 120 is only gonna equal 1 cent, right? And we're taking off new growth, the 329 that's now projected for new growth that
It's not a
we use.
projection, it's solid.
Okay, so that's a solid number. I also talked to the town accountant about getting rid of the solar revenue, the $33,050, that's new revenue, to take that off new growth and slide it over where it belongs in the capital fund, the solar capital fund, so that's not gonna be impacted by taxation.
Well, according to the recap that's there now, that additional 33,000 is on the solar refund, page 2 of the recap, drawing that number. So if this is another way, trying to look at it to lower the overall levy, absolutely. But I don't think the assessors, again, I am here representing them, I cannot say they will sign off on leaving only $120,000.
I don't wanna speak for them either, Kelly. I'm just, all I'm doing is laying out a different scenario that nobody else is doing. And all I'm doing is throwing another option on the table to help exactly what everybody's trying to do is, oh my God, everybody's taxes are going through the roof. How do we reduce taxation a little bit more? And the way I was very creative, and the town accountant that's a professional, been in business for 30-something years, said that's absolutely a way to do it, and you're absolutely correct. So all I'm saying is there is another way of doing this without crushing both classes. That's all.
And that's fine, and I've had informal conversation with my board. I don't think they would have an issue with that, but again, I think the page of the recap where the excess tax levy is, would like to be signed off by a member of the Board of Selectmen's office,
Sure,
that's
there's
all.
no harm, I'd sign that document all day
that's all.
long. What's
And
wrong? There's many
there's no-
municipalities that have excess levy capacity.
That, absolutely,
So-
absolutely, and what I'm saying, and now, in regards to leaving the overlay, they want, well, not they, but I think it would be to the benefit of the Board of Assessors to actually acknowledge that if something extraordinary were to happen and overlay wasn't there to cover some type of catastrophic thing that may happen with value, which I don't foresee, but that would have to come from another revenue source. Because only, like you say, we're running very thin with budgets. Overlay is a sensitive thing in respect to if we have a lot of abatements or exemptions or things that will impact overlay, uncollected taxes that cover that gap, that's an issue. That's
No,
my only.
I totally
that's my
get
only
it.
issue.
In the math that's on this sheet of paper that I have, it comes down to, and we worked out the numbers, it says real estate tax receivables of 551. So the newest update from the town accountant, that's only 441, so there's 100 grand right there. That's a change in the number because we have collected and those receive $100,000 of those receivables. And you have $1.76 million in overlay. The run rate for the last 5 years of abatements and exemptions granted through 6/30/22 is 90 grand. So there's no way you're gonna run into that kind of a problem. I mean, what's gonna happen?
That looks fantastic, that shows I'm doing my job, but thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
But,
No, I get it. You do a great job. Listen, I spent a couple hours sitting down with you, running over different scenarios, and we kind of agreed that, yep, that's another way of doing it. That's all I'm trying to express to my board, is there's another way of doing it. And you've, basically, the practice that the DOR did, if the Board of Assessors were okay with 140, then they gotta be okay now with the 135, because the DOR, took that and dropped it by 5%, so that takes the 140 to 135, that's all I'm saying.
Board of Assessors, again, it is a recommendation. It is the
I'm saying,
approval of this board that makes this happen.
and Mr. Brown said that's where the vote was, 150, and then he also said, when I said, right now I'm at 140 max, and he said, and they're also okay with that. So if everybody was okay with 140, and we just went through the exercise and the DOR said lower it, the new growth, that puts us at 135 now, because that shift jumped a whole 5 percentage points. So if we were okay at 140, we have to be good at 135. It's the same number. So, I mean, that's
Okay,
where I'm at.
Thank you. Well,
Mr. Chairman, just to interject, you have a number of professionals that have over 100 years of experience doing this in the interim town accountant, the interim treasurer collector, myself, and Ms. Koska. If you're going to attract business to this community, if you're going to see if there's any kind of commercial development, if you're not going to have flat new growth, the best practice that we are recommending is that you use Mr. Gasper's concept, because above 135, you're treading on quicksand. And that is not where you want to be. Admittedly, when we did this investigation, we found an excessive amount of uncollected taxes. And we are going to be addressing that with your new finance team between now and the first of the year to make sure the town's interests are protected.
Mr. Kelly, I appreciate that perspective, and I'm down for attracting businesses in town. But quite frankly, the way we are set up with one, we don't even have a building inspector, right? That's number one. Two, the most reasonable part of town that would be attractive to businesses would be we can't even get bylaws passed to encourage business in town. We've got a state highway that runs through the middle of town. Until we solve that problem, we're not gonna have any new businesses in town. So right now, I think we gotta face the fact that we are a residential community, okay? And if we get to the point where we get our act together from a business-friendly standpoint, then we can adjust the rate to make it more attractive to businesses. But right now, we've got residents who are up against it, right? The reports of the highest potential home heating bills that they're gonna be faced with. People need immediate help. That's what I look at. And I don't disagree with Mr. Gasper's due diligence and his perspective on that, and I respect it greatly. But from my perspective, the Board of Assessors made a recommendation. I think it works for today. Next year, if it doesn't work, then we always have the opportunity to go back, right? To go back if we have to. So that's my position. So I think Mr. Gasper's made his point, Mr. Hinckley has. We've got a question before the board to accept the report of the assessors. I think it's time to move it for a vote, and if the votes aren't there, then we're gonna come up with an alternative. So,
Quick question, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, if I may. So at this point, there's no harm in doing the 120 right off the rip, correct? Based off the math, moving the 120 from overlay into excess levy capacity. Either way, that's a win-win. So you were saying that that's not a decision we can make, that has to go through the Board of Assessors. So do we need a motion?
That could be, I'm sorry, but to make his point, and clarify his point, that would need to be voted on by the Board of Assessors, and then...
No, it's not a vote of the Board of Assessors. They sign off on the form through the DOR. I'd have to tell them that this is the scenario of however we get to the end of classification under these stipulations. This is what we're looking at. I don't know if we can put the cart in front of the proverbial horse. I don't know that. I don't foresee an issue.
I like that idea. I just think from a process standpoint, we're in a tax classification hearing right now. I would ask that we set the rate, and then the issue of the
Set the
120.
shift.
Set the shift, and then the issue of the 120, we can take that question up as a advisory or ask the Board of Assessors to consider it, but I think it's got to be decoupled from this conversation right now.
Mr. Chairman, it's this board's authority to take care of the tax classification rate. Everything else you're describing is filling out forms, it's bookkeeping that the staff can come back to the two boards on.
But
That's correct.
also there's a what's what I'm
My
looking for.
fear, David, is I don't want this tax shift to be made on the premise that this is going to happen.
Right.
I cannot answer for the board.
Yeah, understood. And that's why I want to get all that resolved first.
So by the Board of Selectmen voting a specific tax shift today.
Yep.
Not rate, shift. There's two different
Yep.
conversations to be had here.
Yep,
We make a motion to go with a certain tax shift.
yep,
Behind the scenes, Mr. Kelly, yourself, town accountant, treasurer, collector, if we were to do the 120 out of the overlay, that would change the rate
yes,
for
it
tax
would.
bills reasons.
Yes.
End of story.
Yes.
So there can be a couple of motions that can be made. There can be a motion that would be made to take $120,000 from overlay surplus and put in excess levy
I
capacity.
don't think you can make that
We
motion.
can't, but hold on, here's the deal. Can we just get the shift squared away? Because we can make a ceremonial motion to ask the Board of Assessors and the staff to review the $120,000 overlay piece. But we've got, we're conflating the issues and we're confusing things. We've got to set the shift first. And then once we do that, then we can have this discussion about the $120,000, okay? But I think we're just confusing things right now. So if the votes aren't there to accept the assessor's report at $150,000, then the votes aren't there. Then we've got to come up with a different, percentage in the shift. So I would just ask that we stay focused on why we're here today, which is to set a shift. We have too many people interjecting. Mr. Kelly, last time, please.
Whether you do it from the overlay or as far as my revenue computations go, either way, we can reserve the $120,000. You just have to vote now on whether it's 150, 140, 135, and the staff's recommendation was 135.
Staff's recommendation. How did we even have a staff's recommendation to the equation? Was the Board of Assessors recommendation. I
The
don't-
treasurer collector,
But who asked for this, Jimmy?
I did.
Okay, but that's not that's not, maybe one member of the board, but as far as this conversation goes,
That's
The
not
advice
true.
of the staff is, we've spent 20 hours of staff work on this. The advice of the staff was to go with 135, no higher than 140.
okay, well, I reject the staff's work, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can we quantify the difference between 135%, 140% shift? Do you have that? What would the residential and business tax rates be in that difference?
About $30 for every 5%, Mr. Dakin, on the residential.
For both parties?
Here's the tax rate.
Nope, for the commercial, it would jump 100% roughly, or 90%.
These are all the tax rates based on the shift.
No, I mean the dollar value.
You have,
Okay, guys.
we have to.
Excuse me,
adjust
Mr.
the
Dakin.
motion.
Yes.
While it's well-intentioned,
Yep.
we've got a motion on the floor to accept the report of the Board of Assessors. Let's deal with that, and then we'll leave it up to the board to set a shift, okay? We can't be doing this stuff. I appreciate it, Mr. Dakin, but this will take, we'll be here for 3 hours. Now we all of a sudden have a staff's recommendation that's entered into the equation, which wasn't something that was part of the equation when we were talking to the Board of Assessors. The Board of Assessors didn't have the benefit of that discussion. So with that, there's a motion on the floor to accept the assessor's report of 150% shift. All those in favor? Assuming there's 2 votes, I am a yes, so the motion fails. Now we turn it over to the board for discussion on what the shift and what that rate will be. So
I mean-
let the Lisa, I'm a yes for accepting the report.
I make a motion to go with a 135 split.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries and I'm opposed. All right, thank you.
Thank
All
you.
set.
Make a motion to have Mr. Kelly explore the option of using $120,000 of overlay.
No, I am going to reach out to my board members and I will write a memo to the selectmen's office just to have
Just further
confirmation. Yep.
obtains the objective of the chairman, emphasis on helping the residential taxpayers, but it actually helps both classes. Because that's what we're here to do, help both classes. As equally and fairly as we can.
That's a philosophy, right? Everybody has their own philosophy.
Numbers don't lie.
All right, next item is County ARPA Grant Agreement, Project Designation. Mr. Kelly.
Mr. Chairman, I've talked with our consultant. I've explored with DPW and their engineers, just various options on the ARPA. We have in the bank about 4.4 million. The ARPA projects can run anywhere between 4 million and 8 million, if that includes stormwater drainage and sewer improvements. This is just, the reason I bring this up is there is talk about the government coming back and taking all non-designated ARPA funds back. We have the federal funds, we do not have the county funds. We need to sign a county grant agreement, and at that point, just designating what the project is, or projects. The project we investigated was the Slocum Nye water project with total rebuilding of the roads. The fact that there's a new Congress coming in where there is a split in the House and the Senate, the House could move to take those funds back. It's called reclamation. If you sign the grant agreement with the county and we go forward with that, then they cannot reclaim the funds. I think it's a safety measure to reserve those funds. You can at any point redefine the project. You can at any point redefine the intricacies within the project of what you're going to put as far as paving, sidewalks, lighting, etc. It just makes more sense for us to go forward. I'd like the board to put on, to instruct the staff to go and get the county grant agreement for the Slocum 9 projects, bring it forward to the board, and then have the board sign it and go and submit it to the county. And that way we reserve those funds.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So the numbers are like really high, right? I don't think any one of us would think that Slocum and Nye would cost, you know, you're using numbers $6-7 million, right? I mean, that's a ton of money, which God knows where our dollar's gone, is going anyways. It doesn't appear like we'll have enough funds. You said 4.4 million is the total.
No, that's what we have in the bank right now.
So when you say in the bank right now, you
I'm
said
talking-
we have Fed funds but not county funds.
Well, when I'm including the county funds, if we sign the grant agreement, designate county funds, federal funds, the transportation bond issue
Oh,
funds, and we have 111 from an article. That's 4.4 million.
okay, so you're including the transportation bond bill, that 1.5 or whatever's outstanding, and the 111 that's in the,
Yep.
because I think there's an emphasis on getting Slocum Street done. And when I hear this big number, it's kind of, you can't just say, well, you know what, we don't have $7 million to do them both, so neither one of them are gonna get done, and we're gonna take the 4.4 and go skippity-doo-dah down the road and put some flower pots and park benches on side streets and say, look at how good of a job we've done. I think you really gotta allocate that money to a specific project, as you're alluding to. So if it's get the price tag up where it needs to be, the seven, let's just call it $7 million arbitrarily for 9 in Slocum, if that's what we go to the county with to say, look, we're already short money, and that's how we get our cash to lock us in with the county money, I'm fine with doing that. But on the other side of the equation, I just like to emphasize that Slocum Street has been a disaster for decades. And those people have been asking for decades for Slocum Street and sidewalks to be done. So I think the emphasis becomes, in the long run, we'll focus on Slocum Street, but we'll put it all combined as a package, because you said we can tweak the package later
Yes.
of what we're gonna do.
And we can use ARPA money some ARPA money for matching town contribution to grants. And there's a Mass Works grant that's available for the lower end of Slocum as far as the criteria, and there's an MVP grant for the stormwater and sewer improvements that we could use. We just have to apply for it, and we've got a 2-year window to apply for it.
Okay, so what do we need now? A motion to, what do you
Just
need?
to have the staff get the grant agreement from the county designating Slocum and Nye projects.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries. All right, next item. Appoint a building commissioner.
You have had, the board has instructed me to discuss things with Mr. Andrew Bobola as far as employing him. You see, he's very experienced. We also discussed with Freetown a sharing arrangement. They declined. So we have a choice of, if the board wants me to negotiate a contract. He has agreed to the salary range that was advertised, the upper end of the salary range. He asked for 4 weeks vacation to be used as paid time off for sick time or vacation time until he accrues. I told him we couldn't do that in good conscience as a non-accrual. What we could do is, if he really needed it, we could put it as a bank, which would not be any part of a buyout package. We'd eliminate it from a buyout package, and if he had an emergency, he needed to use some, he could use it, but it would still have it based on an accrual basis. I could write up that as far as an agreement, and that means then we'd have probably one of the most experienced building inspectors around.
He's a retiree, correct?
He's a retiree. There's no limit on the amount of time he can spend because the COVID rules are still in place. There's a bill on the governor's desk to extend that. And he would not be any liability as far as retirement or health insurance.
Gentlemen?
I'd like to see the devil's always in the details, right? What kind of hours we're gonna be working, and then we'll figure out.
It would be full-time.
We talked about, the salary. We'll look at how that structure is behind the scenes, and, we'll talk about that as individuals with the town administrator, and, whether he's gonna be full-time 5 days a week. Okay, well, we'll just
So is it
figure out.
motion to appoint Mr. Bobola, and subject to
Subject to the agreement.
negotiation, whatever? You bring back the final product to the board?
Yeah, as long as it's subject to the agreement.
Yeah.
Good.
So a motion,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, next item, we've got a couple MOAs between Mr. Nick Monticello and Ms. Moreo for recognizing increased workload and change of duties, so on and so forth. see Ms. Moreo here.
The agreements before you are amended agreements.
Yep.
Versus the first draft I showed the board.
Okay.
This is to memorialize agreements that were made, in one case in April and the other case in June.
Okay. With the intention of eventually addressing, job descriptions and making sure all this stuff is squared away. Carla, you're here, you waited patiently, I'm assuming you want to say something, or?
I don't, just here, in case you have
Okay.
questions.
No, while we're here, thank you for your work
Thank you.
and your commitment. All right, gentlemen, I'm down with it. You guys?
Yep. Any
Is there a
motion?
motion to approve the MOAs?
Motion to approve the MOAs for the assistant accountant and assistant town collector,
All right.
Assistant treasurer collector.
treasurer collector.
All right, there's a motion, is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carla.
There's a couple announcements.
Yep.
Number one, that the library has received a deposit in the amount of $13,713 and change. This represents the first of 2 awards to be given by the state to the Acushnet Library. Overall, the library state aid has increased by 55% since 2016, in part due to the relocation and an increase in the usage by non-residents.
Phenomenal work by that staff, I can say that much right now. Again, I said it last time when Dina was here, last year in budget seasons. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the amount of people that travel in and out of that library. So congratulations to the staff at the library, and thank you, Dina, for all your hard work. And the library board of trustees as well.
Right.
And also the board has a memo that I sent out to all the department heads about the operating budget. It pretty much is a draconian budget where we are limiting spending because we have very limited revenue. It's just the first pass at the budget.
Okay.
And other than that, we've gone through, I think, a number of things on my report in the past. And because we've had multiple meetings, and I will have a full report at the next meeting.
All right, do we need to do another motion for Nick too, or that was covering both bases?
Covered
Of
both.
the MOAs?
Motion
It was
to be-
both.
Okay, just want to make sure.
Great. All right, thank you.
Thought so.
Gentlemen, we've got 3 quick executive sessions to go in, and the board does not need to come back out of those and return to regular session. First one is executive session under General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 21A, Chapter 6-7, to consider the purchase, exchange, taking, lease, or value of real property, and to comply with provisions of any general or special law or federal grant. Any requirements of an open body will have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public body, as the chair so declares, and the board will return to public session. Roads, infrastructure, ARPA. The other one is executive session under General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 21A3, to conduct strategy and preparation for negotiations with union personnel, or to conduct contract negotiations with union personnel. AFSCME grievance, if an open meeting will have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public body, as the chair so declares, and the board will not return to public session. Executive session, second one is executive session under General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to litigation. Soil board, if an open meeting will have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the public body, as the chair so declares, and the board will not return to public session. And there's a motion to go into executive session for those said purposes.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote, Mr. Gasper?
Yes.
Mr. Hinckley?
Yes.
And I am a yes, and we will not return to open session.